Alan Richter, can you tell me? I guess great news today. Tell me about what the news happened a few hours ago.
Ashley Jansen, a educational assistant, last year, September 21st, was charged with a count of sexual assault and sexual touching of a student. Was acquitted today resoundingly by Justice Peter Tetley at the Ontario Court of Justice here in Oshawa.
Emotion. Three days.
We had 3 days of evidence this week. We had one day of evidence on October 31st. We had a few minutes of evidence this morning, unnecessarily, unfortunately, and then we had our judgment today.
Tell us about the case. This is one of those cases that sticks with you.
It does. It should be a warning to anybody who works, frankly, in any field of education or thereabouts. It was a false allegation made by a student alleging an incident occurred back in 2018. The allegations themselves, I think any reasonable person would find extremely difficult to believe on the face of them. Justice Tetley certainly did not accept them. On the basis singularly of the student's statement given to Detective Amanda Rabishaw, Ashley was arrested. Prior to that statement being given, there was a call that the student made to the police. There was also an interview that was done by an introductory sexual assault officer called a CASA officer. The information on both the phone call and the introductory investigation or the introductory report were inconsistent and contradicted some pretty important details that Detective Amanda Rabishaw picked up in her interview. And she did, a couple months later, ask some questions of the student about those contradictions and didn't challenge the student on the fact that the contradictions were there, simply allowed the student to say, I didn't say those previous things. Well, they were documented that the student did say those things, and Detective Rabishaw just went ahead. But by that point, Ashley had already been arrested, and quite frankly, her life had largely been destroyed at that point.
Is it a failure of a number of things? Is it a failure of the system? Is it a failure of police, the board? Tell me, like, where does fault lie?
Well, there's little doubt that Detective Amanda Rabishaw's investigation was woefully inadequate. But the fact that she was allowed to conduct that kind of a woefully inadequate investigation, the fact that she thought that that's what she was supposed to do, I think speaks volumes to the way sex assault investigations are conducted anymore. I had dealt with another case a year before with Detective Rabishaw, in which I would say her investigation was equally inadequate and poorly done. And in that case, the Crown Attorney ultimately asked the charges be withdrawn as well. So sure, the client in that case was vindicated, but not without having to go through the same kind of hell and torture that Amanda's gone through, or that Ashley's gone through in the last year. And so at the end of the day, Pete, it's an institutional problem. Ashley's, right now, she's a survivor of false allegations of sex assault. She's suffered immeasurable trauma over the last 14 months that she never should have had to face. Had there been a proper investigation done the way an investigation is expected to be done, and a reasonable approach taken to the prosecution, I don't think Ashley ever gets charged.
Even the board, by what the board did, certainly it was leaning towards, it wasn't balanced from the start.
Yeah, and that's why I say this is an issue where all people who work in school boards in whatever capacity need to be cautious. The Kawartha District School Board, Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board, they didn't assist at all with Ashley. And I'm going back to 2018. Ashley was a victim of assault herself by this very student that same year. And yet Ashley got assigned to work with this student that year. In the course of dealing with that student, Ashley and others were assaulted numerous times by the student, just in the course of their role as an educational assistant. When the charges came down, the Kawartha District School Board not only abandoned Ashley and did nothing to support her. They actively went out and relayed to teachers and principals, and as I understand it, instructed that correspondence be given to students, identifying Ashley as having been charged with these offenses and cautioning them about her. The board not only didn't help her in any way whatsoever, they backed the student and they actively went out to assist in making Ashley's life a living hell.
If you can, even it gets worse, and this is I want to just delve into it so much because even the CAS worker that came to her house.
Yeah, before Ashley was even arrested, a gentleman named Tyler Corvers from the CAS came to the house and told Ashley and her husband that Ashley was no longer to be around the kids. She had to leave the house effectively. They had safety concerns for the kids. They hadn't done any investigation or anything. They would have at that point only had information from the Durham Regional Police, from Detective Rabishaw, and with that information, they went and actively disrupted this family. So much so, I understand, Pete, that there were interviews done with the kids, with Ashley's kids, at a Tim Hortons in Newcastle, where Mr. Corvers was asking Ashley's kids, and at the time, she had 5. The youngest, I believe, was 8. All of the kids were asked questions about their body parts and who had been touching their body parts and questions of that nature by a CAS worker. No charges had been laid. At that point, all the police would have been the statement from the student, a statement which today, in the judgment, was resoundingly dismissed and as lacking credibility and reliability.
Does this happen often?
It happens too often. I think, frankly, it's happened a lot more since the Jean Gomeshi decision. I think policing and prosecution and courts generally have taken a very different view of sex assault cases. And I think that, unfortunately, there are individuals like this student who, frankly, weaponize the criminal code and bring these types of false allegations. They know that there's not going to be any meaningful investigation, and this case is a prime example of that. There was no meaningful investigation. Pete, the detective never went to the school where the student alleges the sex assault occurred. And I'll be clear, the allegation was of full intercourse occurring in the school during a school day, in fact, the last day of school. And the officer never went to the school to check the room. A room that the student said had a lock on it and had a window, but that a mat could be placed up against the window so that nobody could see in. Well, our evidence was clear. There was no lock on that door. And as far as a mat being in the room, the student never had anything in that room with the student because the student was so dangerous that any item the student could get their hands on could be used as a weapon. And this is occurring on the last day of school with presumably students and teachers and whatever else is going on in an elementary school on the last day of school. And the detective did nothing to verify or not these details.
Talk a little bit about what you've been through. I have no, like, as I say, I just can't imagine.
It's hard to describe. I mean, I think when I was on the stand, my description was devastation in every aspect of my life. I lost my job. My family was ripped apart. Everything you can think of that puts a family together was taken apart or deconstructed in some capacity. It's been a year of hell, a year, 14 months.
When you first heard about it, shocked, obviously? Like the charges?
Yeah, disbelief. I didn't have words. I remember telling the detective at the time I thought I was going to throw up.
How can you, not how do you, can you get over something like this? Will it always be with you?
Yeah. Yes, my name will always be found on some internet site somewhere attached to this awful, disgusting, heinous charge. And I don't know how I'll ever outlive that.
You haven't taught since, obviously.
No.
Miss it?
No. So I was an EA, and that would have been one of the last years I stayed in that career. It was, as Alan described it, horrendous. Getting punched, spit on, kicked on the regular. You go to work to make a paycheck so you can pay your bills and support your family, and you run out of options when you have to do those things as a responsibility as an adult.
Were you surprised of the lack of support from the union, from your employer?
Yes. At the time of the allegation in 2018, I would have been a full-time employee of Kawartha Pine District School Board and a member of the QP unit. I didn't have words. I felt at the time completely dismissed.
Alone?
Yeah. I mean, aside from close family and friends, you feel judged. Something so awful runs a train that you can't stop from running.
Keep in mind, Pete, in 2022, when Ashley was charged, it was around the time that CUPE was striking. They had all sorts of protests, standing up for their members, asking for better protections for their members, etc., etc. All the while, Ashley was discarded. In fact, as I understand it, members of CUPE took the position that there must be something to the charge. The police surely wouldn't have gone out and just charged her based on a single statement. There must be more. Well, there wasn't, and Ashley was abandoned. The school board, in fact, Pete, went so far as to instruct members, other teachers, not to speak to anybody about this case, and that if somebody came to them to speak to them about it, they were to contact the board first. That impacted the potential of witnesses coming forward on Ashley's behalf. In fact, one of the witnesses who did testify on our behalf, on Ashley's behalf, was interviewed by Detective Ravishon. Now, it was many months later, and quite frankly, it was a pitiful investigation by Detective Ravishon, but nonetheless, the witness clearly said to her, "I'm not allowed to speak to you. I've been told by my school board not to speak to you. I can't name names of people who can assist your investigation." That was, as I see it, and as Justice Tetley saw it, an interference with the investigation by the school board. Now, that witness did come forward, did testify candidly and honestly. I think from my discussions, she has some concerns about ramifications, but she did so under subpoena. So we have a school board that not only protected this student in 2018 when assaulting Ashley and other educational assistants, but when charges come down, they try and protect, I guess, themselves by instructing their members not to speak freely about matters for which they have every right to speak to whomever, lawyers, police officers, whatever. They instructed their own members to keep quiet. And of course, in any day and age, people are going to be concerned about their employment. And so if your employer says to you not to do something and you're concerned about losing your job as a teacher, you're going to do exactly what this witness did, which is go to the police and say, "I can't tell you anything."
One of the letters, this happened obviously in Durham region. This alleged happened and didn't happen. And the complaint was made in Durham region. But even where your children went to school, letters were sent around, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
We received a couple of notifications from friends of family that there was a letter released from the school board with my name on it and the charges, essentially saying, "Don't have concerns. Ashley Jansen no longer works for the school board. If you have any information or any concerns, please come forward." So it painted me living in a small community with my husband who, works day in, day out with people around the community, full of judgment and full of scrutiny and full of what we would view it as I can't think of the word.
Ostracization.
There it is. We were just left to deal with all this by ourselves. We had family and friends that reach out to us and obviously say we don't believe it, or people who I worked with that year that would say, I remember that year specifics, I could give details, but like Alan said, they were afraid to come forward. They were put in a position where it was either they stay at work and pay their bills, or they come forward and speak the truth. And if they chose to speak the truth, it was their understanding that they could lose their jobs.
I don't know you very well, Ashley, but I mean, through all this, is it just numb?
Yeah, that's a good word to put on it. I mean, I've spent 14 months trying to protect myself and protect my family and I have teenage stepsons, and we've gone through everything you could possibly go through, from being called names and humiliated in public, and what we would understand in public situations, people, looking at us kind of in a judgmental way. How do you come back from that?
Last question, Ashley, and thank you for this interview. Where do you go from here?
I have no idea. Try to rebuild anything. Have discussions about what comes next. I don't know. Protect my family first.
Alan, your thoughts, again, where do we go from here?
Pete, survivors of false allegations are everywhere. My experience with them, they're quite eager to have something done up until the point that they get acquitted, and then they're just thankful that it's over with, and they go back to trying to rebuild their lives just like Ashley did. There's a lot of survivors of false allegations out there. Their voices are quiet because they're singular. I frankly would like to see a grouping of those voices. I'd like to see a real concerted effort being made to put those false allegations together, to put those survivors of this traumatic experience together. People need to just take a minute and think what it would be like if somebody falsely accused you of committing a horrendous sexual assault. How would your life be? Because whatever you think it's going to be, it's not as bad as it really, really is. And it needs to stop. And that is to say, real victims of sex assault need to be addressed. They need to be assisted. Prosecutions, investigations need to be done, and wrongdoers need to be brought to justice. But we can't do it at the expense of the innocent, not when it damages lives the way this one has.